Chapter 1811, Beyond Insane. That's right, meridians. The meridians are very similar to those in the human body, and they emulated through bionics. The source positive circulation cores are like parts of our bodies, or even cells, and they're all firmly connected to these meridians. It was such a wonderful sight. I have no idea what kind of genius could have come up with something like this. At the time, I was truly overcome with emotion, and I finally understood what I had been pursuing all this time. Thus, I began my experiments, trying to connect cores through meridians. Sure enough, I succeeded, and I finally found an opening for a breakthrough on a bottleneck that's been stumping me for so long. Her eyes were filled with excitement as she spoke, and even though she was only an ordinary person, all of the titled Douluos of the Tang sect and Shrek Academy present were struck by a sense of fear in her presence. Ling Zichen's persistence in soul technology research was far beyond even their persistence in cultivation. Just how insane was this woman? Having said that, they had to admit that it was precisely her insanity that had made her become such a brilliant scientist. Ling Zichen paid no heed to everyone's expressions. She was currently completely immersed in a world of her own. After several successful experiments, I developed a bold idea, one that sounded a little mad even to me. Firstly, I set up a hypothesis, which was that eternal heaven is actually an unfinished product rather than the final product that the scientists from that era had actually intended to create. In other words, they only completed a portion of the envisioned final product. Eternal heaven was an unfinished product. Everyone was completely bewildered to hear this. Ling Zichen continued. Through this experiment, I was able to confirm my hypothesis. The reason I say it's an unfinished product is also because of the meridians. The source positive circulation cores inside eternal heaven were organized exactly according to the meridians in a human body, but its shell does match its interior. Of course, it's just a soul missile, but in my eyes, the shell is far too ordinary considering its brilliant internal structure. Then, I saw a very small engraving on an internal corner of the shell, and the engraving read, Man-made warrior. As soon as I saw those two words, I was struck by a sense of enlightenment because I clearly recalled a proposal made by a scientist many years ago. Soul masters are powerful, but is there a way for ordinary people in this world to use soul energy? Is there a way to implant soul energy into an ordinary person's body to make them just as powerful as soul masters? I am an ordinary person with a trash marshal soul that can't be cultivated, but I wanted to become powerful, so I've constantly been researching this topic. As you saw, I implanted my mecha into my own body and created energy stores for it through a series of independent source positive circulation cores, thereby making myself a superhuman warrior. Even though a mecha like this can't be mass-produced, I felt like I had succeeded. However, after witnessing eternal heaven's internal structure, I discovered that even though I was on the right path, I was still far away from the finishing line. Thus, I developed a bold idea. If I can replicate this system of meridians and implant a large number of source positive circulation cores into my own body to fuse with my mecha, I'll be able to transform myself into eternal heaven. Wouldn't I be a true super warrior then? I conducted some simulations and many experiments, and on a purely theoretical basis, this was viable. However, eternal heaven belongs to the Tang sect and Shrek Academy, and it's too important for me to experiment on. On top of that, the experiment I want to conduct is very dangerous, so it could be said that this was the opportunity I had been waiting for. Haha, they actually agreed for me to conduct my experiment. I'm so happy. Everyone exchanged bewildered glances upon hearing this. Tang Wulin could still clearly recall everything that Ling Zichen had said in the main control center, and looking back now, it became clear to him that everything she had said had been for the sake of her research. Perhaps the consequences wouldn't be as dire as she proclaimed, but there was only one eternal heaven, and it had to be used if she wanted to conduct her experiment. The word insane wasn't even doing her justice anymore. Ling Zichen sighed. If I had enough time, perhaps I would also be able to create a man-made meridian source positive circulation core. But there aren't enough resources available to me. During the creation of eternal heaven, almost the entirety of the Federation's supply of uncommon metals have been used up to create so many source positive circulation cores. Our Tang sect doesn't have that many uncommon metals for me to work with, so this was my only opportunity, and I had to grasp it no matter what. Indeed, experimenting with eternal heaven really was her only opportunity, and it was the best opportunity for her to fulfill her dream. Only now did Tang Wulin and the others finally understand her thought process. It was no wonder she had been so persistent on that day. Looking back now, the success rate was most likely not as high as she had proclaimed, even though she had succeeded in the end. Ling Zichen continued. However, my experiment was only a half success. My direction and method were both correct, and I really did manage to fuse eternal heaven with my mecha and implant it into my body. I was extremely excited, and I told you that I had succeeded, but in reality, I could see that there was room for development, and this is the future for humanity. So you must remember it well. Super warriors really can be created. In the future, if we want to explore outer space, then we need to become more powerful, and super warriors will be a compulsory area of research. Only by creating super warriors will we have more powerful beings to face formidable enemies. Take these abyssal creatures for example. We're no match for them as we don't have sufficient high-end power. How many titled Douluo do we have? Compare that with the number of powerful beings of the same caliber in the abyssal plane. Only in the instant that I fired the eternal heaven cannon did I truly understand what my problem was. I hate to admit it, but it's the truth. My body is too fragile. Even with the extensive genetic modification I've undergone to strengthen my own body, I still only possess the body of an ordinary human. I was able to successfully turn myself into a super weapon, but my body is unable to withstand the side effects. If, for example, I had implanted eternal heaven into Wulin's body instead, then he would be able to easily bear the side effects, and eternal heaven would be a weapon that he could use with minimal consequences. However, for me, using this weapon is lethal. I only fired it once, and I was already convinced that I was done for. If Wulin hadn't been there to protect me, I would have most likely already been erased out of existence. And even then, the Holy Spirit Douluo had to save my life. Hence, as soon as I woke up, the first thing I realized was that it really is impossible for humans to become top-tier powerful beings. The subjects of super warrior modification can only be soul masters, and the future for humanity is to fuse source positive circulation cores with soul masters, making use of soul masters' physical advantages to handle more powerful weapons. This is a path that the human race must take for space exploration and to gather more resources in the future. Chapter 1812, Ling Zichen's radiance. At this point, Ling Zichen was practically glowing with joy, and she murmured to herself, think about it. If a source positive circulation core were implanted into the body of a low-grade soul master, they would be able to quickly reach the next soul power bottleneck, then absorb a soul spirit before continuing to progress. With more source positive circulation cores implanted into their body, they would be able to progress until they reached the limit of their physical tolerance, elevating them to the titled Douluo level. This means that my technology can theoretically mass-produce titled Douluos. Anyone who has any aptitude for cultivation will be able to become a titled Douluo, regardless of what their martial soul is. That will be a massive step for all of humanity, and the starting point for our plight to conquer space. At this point, everyone finally understood what she was trying to say. Man-made titled Douluos. Just the mere thought was terrifying. That would be a far more significant breakthrough than even the spirit Pagoda's man-made soul spirits. However, if this vision could come true, then humanity really would be taking a giant stride forward. If all of the soul masters of the human race were at the titled Douluo level, then the abyssal plane would be nothing. Even if abyssal creatures could infinitely resurrect themselves, they wouldn't be able to establish a foothold at all in the human world. A detailed record of Ling Zichen's words had already been made, and Ling Zichen raised her hand again. This time, she was in far better condition and was able to move, albeit with difficulty. It had to be said that Yali really was a miracle worker. Ling Zichen said, take me to my room. I have to record all of the data I gathered just now, then immediately save it. This is extremely important for our Tang sect. Tang Wulin helped her to her feet before handing her over to Cowdaja. At this moment, not a single person was able to say anything. All of a sudden, Tang Wulin's military communicator began to ring, shaking him out of his stunned stupor. All right, we'll set off right away. Only after hearing what Guanzi had to say on the other side of the line did Tang Wulin finally recover from the astonishment of what he had just heard. Everyone, it's time to seal the passageway. Let's set off right away. Casting his gaze toward the storm of artillery fire in the distance, he was already able to sense her presence there. The earlier explosion had undoubtedly generated an astronomical amount of abyssal energy, and he had to devour as much of it as possible. The tree of life needed this energy for its evolution. With that in mind, Tang Wulin rose up into the air and flew directly toward the remnants of the Blood River Godslayer array. In reality, no one was more stunned than he was by that eternal heaven blast. He had been supporting Ling Zichen from behind, so he was able to see the blast from up close. He could clearly sense that in that instant, Ling Zichen's entire body seemed to have been ignited. Unprecedentedly tremendous energy erupted out of her body, and countless source positive circulation cores converged to create a drastic qualitative change before finally focusing on the cannon barrel on her chest and being released. In that instant, Ling Zichen's aura had definitely been elevated to the quasi-god level, so it really was a miracle that her body hadn't disintegrated on the spot. This was most likely what she had meant when she had mentioned the adjustments she had made at the point of firing. What had almost killed her was the enormous recoil, but no issue issues occurred prior to firing. This was Ling Zichen's success, and she truly was a brilliant scientist. The feeling of every single cell in her body being ignited had left a profound impression on Tang Wulin, and it struck him with some inspiration with regard to his next Dragon Emperor restriction technique. If he could ignite every single one of his cells without regard for consequences and activate their peak power, then he would become an incredibly formidable being. His cells naturally couldn't compare with source-positive circulation cores, but there was a massive number of cells in a human's body. Regardless of how intricately eternal heaven had been created, it couldn't possibly contain that many source-positive circulation cores. How could this be achieved? Could he get every cell to circulate like a soul core? While he was considering this matter, he had already arrived on the battlefield. Artillery fire was still raining down from the heavens, and violent shockwaves were surging across the entire battlefield. Without limit Douluo level power, it really would be very difficult to traverse through such a perilous battlefield. Tang Wulin released his dragon's repulse to protect his own body, then accurately weaved through the gaps in the artillery fire just as Yuena had done earlier, speeding toward the enemy as his golden dragon spear began to devour abyssal energy. However, his brows quickly furrowed slightly, not because there was too much abyssal energy to devour, but too little. To his surprise, the abyssal energy in the area was already very thin, and even though there was still a constant stream flowing into his golden dragon spear, the amount was very little. The explosion had wiped out countless abyssal creatures, yet there was very little abyssal energy in the air. How was this possible? Right at this moment, a familiar aura suddenly approached him, and he stopped before casting his gaze toward that direction. A silver figure that was radiating rainbow light emerged from the dust and debris before arriving by his side. At this moment, Yuena's battle armor was radiating dazzling silver light, and her entire body seemed to have become transparent. Under the backdrop of the relentless storm of artillery fire, she was so stunning and radiant that even though Tang Wulin had seen her countless times, he still couldn't help but be rooted to the spot. This was the woman that had captured his heart. They clearly loved one another, but they couldn't be together. In her presence, even the light radiating from Tang Wulin's battle armor began to glow brighter. Forward battle armor was prone to being affected by the emotions of its wearer, and Tang Wulin's emotions were currently fluctuating extremely violently. Yuena was also looking at him. His appearance hadn't changed much since their last separation. Only his eyes seemed to have become brighter and more profound. In his suit of spectacular golden battle armor, he was bound to be the focus of attention on any battlefield. Thinking back to the despair and deep pain she had seen in his eyes not long ago, she had felt as if her heart had been impaled by a sharp dagger. His love for her was so strong and fervent, yet he could only repress it due to their circumstances. Explosions were still ringing out incessantly around them, but the violent shockwaves weren't even able to make the protective energy around them ripple in the slightest. For some reason, Yuena was struck by the feeling that this was a moment that belonged only to the two of them. She spread open her silver wings and abruptly rushed forward. Her long silver hair trailed along behind her in the wind, and her purple eyes were obscured by a film of tears. Tang Wulin reflexively spread open his arms and allowed her to dive into his embrace. Golden Dragon Moon Song and Silver Dragon Dancing Qilin were instantly withdrawn, granting them a tight and seamless embrace. The two suits of battle armor were hovering behind them, still in their humanoid forms, and they were glowing radiantly as they protected their wearers. Chapter 1813, The Flare of That Kiss. Not far away, the limit Douluos of the Tang sect and Shrek Academy could see their embrace. Tongyu had no idea about the relationship between the two, and he immediately rushed forward out of concern, only to be held back by Yali. Yuena's body was soft yet supple, and she seemed to have grown a little taller yet again, so she was now only slightly shorter than Tang Wulin. Her fragrance was so familiar, and the feeling of embracing her was so captivating. In that instant, Tang Wulin felt as if he had gone back in time and returned to the days they had spent at Shrek Academy. She had always been by his side and had always been his most staunch supporter. Her fragrance was still so enchanting. It was faint and refreshing, yet lingered in his memory. She raised her head and stared deep into his eyes. On this occasion, she didn't tell him to leave, nor did she say anything. All she did was look at him. Tang Wulin felt a rush of blood surge into his brain, and his emotions instantly overflowed. Right at this moment, she pressed her lips against his in a deep kiss. Countless days and nights of lovesickness and yearning had finally concluded with this reunion. Her lips were soft and cool, yet her aura was scorching hot, and all Tang Wulin wanted to do in this moment was to fuse her into his own body. He wanted nothing more than for this moment to last for all of eternity. Everything in the outside world seemed to be completely unrelated to them, and under the protection of Golden Dragon Moon Song and Silver Dragon Dancing Qilin, the two were completely absorbed in their passionate kiss. All of a sudden, Tang Wulin felt a surge of extremely rich energy flow from Yuena's lips, and he shuddered involuntarily, immediately following which his greenish golden soul ring naturally emerged. The enormous surge of life energy injected itself into his body in a relentless stream, and Tang Wulin wanted to stop her, but found himself completely unable to do anything. Furthermore, under the stimulus of Yuena's Silver Dragon King aura, Tang Wulin's Golden Dragon King aura began to evolve. The silver light radiating from Yuena's body fused as one with Tang Wulin's golden radiance, instantly transforming into nine-colored light that gave off an unprecedentedly powerful aura. The nine-colored light formed a giant cocoon that enveloped both of them, and a hint of recognition immediately flashed through Cao Daj's eyes upon seeing this. It's her. During the last abyssal tide, it was Yuena's arrival that had allowed Tang Wulin to unleash the dragon god transformation to force back the Holy Lord's finger. If it weren't for Yuena, perhaps the abyssal passageway being guarded by the blood god legion would have already been broken. Nine colours swirled around them, and Tang Wulin felt as if his entire being were undergoing a drastic change. Golden dragon scales gradually began to appear over his body, completely out of his control, and every single scale was shimmering with dazzling light. An unprecedented feeling of strength surged out of the core of his being, and in that instant, he could sense that he had finally achieved the final breakthrough to an invincible Vajra body, reaching the same level of physical prowess as Arahang. Furthermore, this change was still ongoing. A burst of buzzing abruptly rang out from within his soul core, and a massive vortex appeared in his mind. The half-formed soul core there instantly took shape, forming a complete 3-in-1 circulation system with the soul core in his dantian and the dragon core in his chest. Tang Wulin's aura was also beginning to spike at a drastic rate, and his eyes widened as he stared at Yuena, but her eyes remained shut, and the sight of her long eyelashes resting gently on the top of her cheeks was extremely alluring. He raised a hand to gently stroke her long silver hair, and in this moment, there was only guilt in his heart, guilt over the fact that he had ever doubted her love for him. Regardless of what she had done, she had never betrayed him, and perhaps everything she was doing was for the sake of creating a better future for the two of them. Yuena, I'll wait for you no matter how long it takes. Tears welled up in his eyes, and in that instant, he had ascended to the limit Douluo level. This was most likely the first time in history that a limit Douluo breakthrough had been made through a kiss. Yuena had injected the enormous life energy she had just devoured into Tang Wulin's body, helping him break through his limits and forge an invincible Vajra physique. From this moment forth, Tang Wulin was finally standing at the very pinnacle of this world. Thinking back, he was just a mediocre young boy with a trash martial soul and a defective soul spirit, but through his hard work and determination, he had endured countless hardships and setbacks to finally reach this point. Finally, he was at the very pinnacle of humanity, reaching the very limit of human capabilities. With the formation of his invincible Vajra body and the extremely rare 3-core circulation system, he had reached the demigod level right away with no acclimation process required. Furthermore, even though he was only a demigod, his power definitely wasn't inferior to any quasi-god. Finally, their lips reluctantly parted, and Yuena rested her head tightly against his chest, as if she were listening to his heartbeat. In this moment, Tang Wulin's heart was filled with satisfaction and emotion. All of the hard work he had put in was worth it. All of it was so that they would have a better future together. Don't worry about the Kayanki family. I won't let them off the hook, Yuena said in a gentle voice. Despite the myriad explosions taking place around them, Tang Wulin could clearly hear every single word she said. A thought suddenly occurred to him, and he chuckled. I just realized that the Tang sect master just kissed the spirit Pagoda chairwoman. Imagine how stunned the Federation would be if this news were to spread. Yuena gently punched him in the chest in a gesture of embarrassment. This battle isn't over yet. By the time I arrived, the vast majority of the abyssal energy created by the eternal heaven explosion had already been drawn into the abyssal passageway. I didn't even manage to absorb 10% of the total energy. They're not just going to give up here, and I have a very bad feeling about all of this, so we have to act right away. It's time to stop the artillery fire. Tang Wulin's heart jolted slightly upon hearing this. Due to the debris being blown up into the air by the explosions, it was impossible to see the entrance to the abyssal passageway. He could only get a rough sense of its location. Yuena took advantage of this opportunity to extricate herself from his embrace, and urged, go on, time is of the essence. Tang Wulin looked deep into her eyes, and he suddenly said, but the sea god's pavilion master also wants to kiss the spirit Pagoda chairwoman. A deep flash immediately appeared on Yuena's face, and she gave him a delicate glare before vanishing on the spot amid a flash of silver light, but that parting glare had already been firmly imprinted in Tang Wulin's mind. Let's go. Tang Wulin called out to the limit Douluos in the distance before flying back toward the defensive line. Amid all of this artillery fire, there would be no way to get a communication signal, so they had to emerge from the area being targeted by the bombardment first. Finally, they flew out of the debris and into the open. Even though Yuena had left, Tang Wulin simply couldn't repress the smile on his face. Her fragrance was still lingering on her lips, and the taste was so familiar and wonderful. All he wanted now was for everything to end as soon as possible so he could return to her side. The fact that she had proclaimed her determination to punish the Kyanji family was an indication that she still saw herself as a member of Shrek Academy. Wasn't that enough? Commander, the vast majority of abyssal energy has been drawn back into the abyssal plane, and the situation may not be as favorable as we anticipated. I think we should cease the bombing so we can ascertain the situation in the abyssal passageway, then decide what to do next. I suggest sending powerful soul masters to join forces with us and seal the passageway should the opportunity arise. Chapter 1814. Disappearance of the abyssal passageway. Tang Wulin immediately communicated his thoughts through his military communicator. All right, Guanzi immediately replied. He had developed a great deal of trust in Tang Wulin, regardless of whether Eternal Heaven was a one-time usage weapon or a super weapon that could be fired multiple times. That wasn't important anymore. The important thing was that the Blood River Godslayer array had been broken. This contribution alone was enough to make up for the fact that the Tang sect and Shrek Academy had stolen Eternal Heaven, and even more importantly, it showed that their heart was still in the right place. Only after a full 10 minutes had passed did the artillery fire finally cease, and at this point, the terrain had already been completely transformed. The earth was riddled with craters, and the area where the abyssal army had previously been situated had caved in by several hundred meters. However, once the dust settled, everyone was stunned to discover that the abyssal passageway had disappeared. The powerful beings of the Tang Wulin and Shrek Academy were hovering in midair, releasing their spiritual power to scour the landscape, only to discover that the aura of the abyssal plane had also vanished. This discovery immediately dampened everyone's excitement. A said abyssal passageway was naturally quite terrifying, but at the very least, its location was known. In contrast, a vanished abyssal passageway was far more fearsome. The main concern was whether it would appear behind a human army. Guanzi had already arrived with many powerful beings from the military in the battle god hall. What happened? How could the abyssal passageway have disappeared? None of our surveillance soul tools have managed to ascertain where it's gone. Guanzi said in an urgent voice. Calm down, Commander. Let's think about this logically. Back when the abyssal passageway was under the protection of the Blood River Godslayer array, it was only able to move very slowly. That's definitely not an act. If it had been capable of moving faster, it would have already made a rush for our defensive line when that branch of the abyssal army stormed the Western Legion. As such, that should be its maximal speed, which means that even if it had moved away, it definitely couldn't have gone far, and there's certainly no way it would have crossed our defensive line. On top of that, it shouldn't be that easy for the abyssal passageway to move. Otherwise, why is it that the abyssal passageway being guarded by the Blood God Legion for all these years has never moved? This undoubtedly has something to do with the seal, but it never showed any signs of movement even before the seal was set up. Hence, I think the abyssal passageway's ability to move is directly related to the Blood River Godslayer array. Guanzi gradually calmed down upon hearing this analysis. You don't mean? Both of them cast their eyes toward the crater not far away. While Chen's engine mused, there's a very good chance that it sunk down into the earth rather than moved anywhere. It must have withdrawn toward the abyssal passageway to buy some time. Everyone was enlightened upon hearing this, and Guanzi immediately declared, then we'll dig down until we find it. We have to take advantage of this opportunity to seal that passageway. The mecha core that had accompanied him to the scene immediately rushed toward the crater at his behest. Meanwhile, Guanzi gently tugged on Tang Wulin's sleeve, and a gentle layer of soul power enveloped both of them. Sect Master Tang, there's something I want to ask you, he said as he appraised Tang Wulin intently. Go ahead, Tang Wulin prompted. Guanzi asked, can Eternal Heaven be used a second time? Tang Wulin shook his head in response. We're not sure of that at the moment. The side effects are far too severe. Head researcher Ling had actually already perished during the firing process, but she was resurrected by the Holy Spirit Douluo. Even so, her injuries are very severe, and we don't know how much energy Eternal Heaven has left, so I can't give you a definitive answer. Guanzi was silent for a moment before continuing. If it's possible, then make the preparations. No one knows what's going to happen next. I understand, Tang Wulin replied with a nod. He naturally wasn't going to tell the whole truth to Guanzi. After all, this concerned the future of the Tang sect and Shrek Academy, and he really was unsure of whether Eternal Heaven could be used a second time. At the very least, it seemed quite implausible based on Ling Zichen's condition. Even with Yali treating her, the fact of the matter was that she had been clinically dead for a short while, and it would take a very long time to recover from the after effects. Under these circumstances, how could they risk using Eternal Heaven again? The excavation process had already begun, but even after digging over 100 meters deep into the ground, there was still no sign of the abyssal passageway's aura, and that was very disturbing to everyone. Guanzi issued an order for all of the human army surveillance soul tools to be activated to search for the abyssal passageway around the site of the bombing. No one had anticipated that something like this would happen. The Blood River Godslayer array had finally been destroyed, but the abyssal passageway had disappeared. Furthermore, all of the most powerful beings of the abyss and the Holy Spirit cult had also vanished. Judging from what Yuena had told him, Tang Wulin knew that the Eternal Heaven blast hadn't managed to destroy the abyssal passageway. Otherwise, there would have been no way for the abyssal energy to flow back into it. Currently, the most pressing concern was that no one knew where the abyssal passageway had gone. It was like a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. After searching for 3 whole days, there were still no new discoveries made. Virtually the entire northernmost region had been searched, but not even a single abyssal creature had been found. The Southern Legion finally arrived and became part of the defensive line. After several bouts of analysis and discussion, the Blood God Legion, Shrek Academy, the Tang sect, the Spirit Pagoda, the Battle God Hall, and the military had arrived at a consensus. As a plane that was connected with the Douluo plane, there had to be set coordinates to the abyssal plane. It seemed that Eternal Heaven really had severely ravaged the abyssal army, forcing them into retreat. And in order to prevent this passageway from being sealed by the human army, the abyssal plane had decided to flee. They had closed this passageway voluntarily, and this was why the human army was unable to find it. Under these circumstances, there would be no way for the human army to track down the abyssal passageway unless the abyssal plane opened it again. However, if they did reopen the passageway, there was a very good chance that it would open up in the distance, as that was where the coordinates were positioned. Having reached this conclusion, the consensus was to begin setting up defensive infrastructure and a sealing array around the site where the abyssal passageway had disappeared. Even though the seal wouldn't be as effective as it wouldn't be set up directly on the abyssal passageway, it was still better than nothing. At the very least, with some defensive infrastructure set up, the human army would be bought sufficient time if the abyssal passageway were to be opened again. None of the 8 major legions dared to let their guard down, and following a meeting, it was decided that they would temporarily remain in the northernmost region until the defensive infrastructure around the site was complete, which was projected to take at least half a year. At the same time, former Sea God Legion Commander Chen Xingji, Central Legion Commander Guanzi, Western Legion Commander Dong Xian, and several other high-ranking military officials had issued a joint official request to the Federation to resume research into super weapons. Chapter 1815, Resumption of super weapon production. This battle had highlighted just how important super weapon could be on the battlefield. If it hadn't been for Eternal Heaven destroying the Blood River Godslayer array, the entire defensive line would have been under serious threat. Humans already had the ability to research and develop weapons on the same level as Godslayer missiles, but research into this area was abandoned due to a lack of resources and assumption that super weapons of this caliber weren't necessary. Now that the threat of the abyssal plane was looming, the military naturally hoped to resume research into this field. Only with sufficiently powerful weapons would they have the confidence to keep the abyssal plane in check. And on this occasion, even the Dou faction didn't object, so the proposal to resume research into super weapons was passed almost by unanimous vote in Parliament. Furthermore, the federal government extended an invitation toward the Tang sect, inviting head researcher Ling Zicchen to lead this project, and all of the resources would be provided by the Federation. As for the specific conditions involved, that would require an extensive negotiation process. Standing at the foot of the secondary tree of life, Tang Wulin cast his gaze toward the site where the abyssal passageway had disappeared with a contemplative expression. 7 days later, the abyssal passageway had already disappeared for 7 days, and the construction of some basic defensive infrastructure was already complete around the site, but that was naturally going to be further bolstered over time. The clash between the human army and the abyssal army seemed to have already concluded, and the Holy Spirit cult's ambitious plans were also cut short due to the destruction of the Blood River Godslayer array. Furthermore, Tang Wulin had had become a limit Douluo, and everything seemed to be progressing in a positive direction. However, for some reason, Tang Wulin couldn't shake this feeling of unease. He always felt like the Abyssal Army would reappear somewhere in the future. According to Yuena, the vast majority of the Abyssal energy from the Abyssal Army had been withdrawn, so it wouldn't take too long before another Abyssal Army could be assembled. Most importantly, the Abyssal Plane held the initiative, and it was impossible to predict when they would strike next. For Tang Wulin, the biggest reward he had reaped from this battle wasn't his breakthrough. He was already very close to the limit Douluo level, and the breakthrough was only a matter of time with the reciprocation from the Tree of Life. The biggest reward for him was that kiss, which had completely affirmed his trust in his relationship with Yuena. Just a day ago, the Spirit Pagoda had officially announced Yuena as the new Spirit Pagoda chairwoman, and not only was she the youngest leader of the Spirit Pagoda in history, she was also one of very few women to have undertaken this role. This news instantly stunned the entire continent, particularly the Soulmaster world. Many people were speculating that this had something to do with the pressure being exerted upon the Spirit Pagoda by Shrek Academy and the Tang sect. Furthermore, the Kyangi family seemed to have stepped away from the limelight. Currently, the powerful beings of the Spirit Pagoda were still in the northernmost region, and Yuena would be officially inaugurated following their return. Once that happened, she would become the leader of the #1 power on this continent. Tang Wulin naturally couldn't go find her at this time, but he really could barely wait. Once Yuena took care of the Kyangi family, perhaps it would be time for him to pay a visit. If only the threat of the Abyssal Plane didn't exist. However, now that he thought about it, even the government would most likely intervene if the Spirit Pagoda chairwoman and the Tang sect master were to declare union in marriage. After all, the Tang sect and Shrek Academy had just experienced a resurgence, while the Spirit Pagoda was the Federation's #1 organization. The combined influence of these three superpowers would completely undermine the federal government. Once everything settled down, perhaps he could resign from all his duties and no longer represent the Tang sect and Shrek Academy. Once that happened, he would be able to be together with Douluo. With that in mind, a faint smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face. So what was he going to do next if the Abyssal Passageway continued to remain hidden? He had already considered this question. When facing the Abyssal Army, particularly the Spirit Sovereign, he had been struck by a sense of powerlessness. The Spirit Sovereign was only at a godly level when it came to spiritual power, but that was already enough to place enormous pressure upon him. At the very least, he was currently still nowhere near powerful enough to contend with a being of that caliber. Yuena's spiritual power most likely hadn't truly reached the divine origin realm, either. After all, that was prohibited due to the restrictions of the plane. Thus, if he wanted to have a safe future with her, then he needed more power. If he could reach a level where he would be able to repress the Abyssal Plane alone, then it wouldn't matter when the Abyssal Passageway was going to resurface. Furthermore, his goal had always been to cultivate to godhood. Only then would he be able to find his parents. Thus, Tang Wulin's plan was to go into a period of self-improvement. His objective wasn't simply to progress to the quasi-god level. He wanted to take a giant stride and undergo a fundamental change. With his incredibly solid foundation, it would only be a matter of time for him to reach the quasi-god level. So for him to make a fundamental improvement at this level, there was only one direction to pursue. With that in mind, a golden trident symbol appeared on Tang Wulin's forehead at his behest. This sea god's trident had been bestowed upon him by his father, and he had only passed the first 3 trials. Through his constant reflection, Tang Wulin noticed that with each trial that he passed, his affinity with the sea god's trident would increase slightly, and he would be able to draw upon more of its power. He was still very far away from being able to wield the trident like an extension of his body, as was the case with the golden dragon spear. He was already a limit Douluo, so surely he possessed enough power to undergo the next trials and gain the acknowledgement of this divine weapon. No, it wasn't a divine weapon. It was a transcendent divine weapon that ranked above even the golden dragon spear. Once he became a quasi-god, perhaps he would be able to contend with the Holy Lord with this transcendent divine weapon by his side. Once that happened, he would stand at the very pinnacle of this world. What reason would Yuena have not to be with him then? This was Tang Wulin's plan. He didn't know when the Abyssal Passageway was going to appear next, and the trials of the golden trident took a long time in that world. But time seemed to pass a lot faster there than on the Douluo continent, so this was the perfect opportunity for him. A series of giant warships were roaming the Arctic Ocean of the northernmost region, patrolling the area with all types of powerful detection soul tools. Due to their presence, even the most powerful sea soul beasts didn't dare to approach this area. Humans had already become the rulers of this continent long ago, and soul beasts were no match. However, in the depths of the ocean, beyond the effective range of all of the detection soul tools, an enormous black figure was slowly swimming past, and there was faint purplish golden light shimmering from its body. The Abyssal Army was like a passing storm, disappearing without a trace. If it weren't for the ravaged landscape and the severe losses suffered by the Northern Legion and Western Legion, it would be as if the disaster had never struck. Half a month ago, the foundational defensive infrastructure was completed, and all 8 major legions had contributed the most powerful defensive soul tools in their possession. The Blood God Legion was also carving the Blood God array onto the giant crater, and the array would take quite some time to complete, but progress was smooth and steady. Over at the Shrek Academy encampment, Ling was experiencing some issues. Even though she had been revived by Yali, her fusion with Eternal Heaven and the aftermath of that fearsome explosion had left her with severe health complications, and Yali had coined the term Withering Life Force to describe her situation. Chapter 18:16, Withering Life Force. Regardless of how much genetic modification Ling underwent, she was still a normal person, and the power of Eternal Heaven was far too much for her to bear. Despite her preparations and astute hypotheses, the terrifying recoil had still almost destroyed her. However, she was fortunate in that she was receiving the assistance of the only healing system limit Douluo in this world, as well as the secondary Tree of Life. The only way to treat Withering Life Force is to constantly inject enormous amounts of life energy into her body to sustain her until her body was able to generate its own life force again. With the protection of the secondary Tree of Life, this wasn't an issue, but Ling had to constantly remain near the secondary Tree of Life until she recovered. Yali had told her that she would never be able to fire Eternal Heaven again. Otherwise, even a god would struggle to save her. Sustaining Withering Life Force a second would destroy the core of her being, and with her passing, Eternal Heaven would also be lost. Ling hadn't offered a response to this, but those familiar with her knew that it was very difficult to predict what she would do once she entered her mad scientist mode. At the same time, she was going to receive the most thorough protection as she was literally a walking Eternal Heaven. Half a month after the Abyssal Passageway's disappearance, the Federation issued a reward to the Tang sect and Shrek Academy that was comprised of a large quantity of resources. Northern Legion Commander Go Jundong was also rewarded with a promotion to the general rank. If it weren't for the countless sacrifices made by the Northern Legion, there wouldn't have been enough time to mobilize the Federation's troops, and had the Northern Front been overwhelmed, disaster would have struck the entire continent. Go's Henfeng had led from the front and almost perished, but the silver lining was that he had now become the youngest general in the Federation. The sky was the limit for him, and he had become the brightest young star in the military, dethroning Shen Yue from that position. In direct contrast to his fate was the one suffered by Dongxian. He had refused to follow orders, and his actions had caused the Western Legion to suffer heavy losses. As a result, he was sent straight to military court, and even the Chief Army Commissioner wasn't able to save him. However, as a limit Douluo, he was naturally given a special pardon, so he only demoted to the senior colonel rank, and he would continue to serve in the Western Legion. Northwestern Legion Commander Yin Moshan would also take on the role of Western Legion Commander in the interim. Once the situation in the northernmost region completely settled down, a new permanent commander would be elected. As for the Spirit Pagoda, the only information that was released was that there was now a new chairwoman, but the issue of Kyangi Dongfang advising Dongxian to go against military orders wasn't exposed, thereby saving some face for the organization. After all, Kyangi Dongfang had already paid the price for his actions. At the Tang sect and Shrek Academy encampment, I've invited everyone here today to discuss who will be returning to the academy and who will be staying here. Tang Wulin was conducting the post-battle meeting. The Abyssal Passageway had been gone for half a month. The military could continue to stay here as where they didn't affect the normal operation of the Federation. The Tang sect wouldn't be heavily impacted, either, as the personnel sent here were all battle units. However, the same didn't apply for Shrek Academy. In order to contend with the Abyssal Plane and the Holy Spirit cult, Shrek Academy had deployed almost all of its high-end power, who were also the most important teachers of the academy. For example, Lan Muzi and Tang Yunmeng had just set up the inner court, and they were in the process of selecting inner court disciples. Furthermore, they also had to train some of the young teachers, and they were very busy. So now that things had settled down, it was time to consider whether they should leave or stay. Cao Dada said, there isn't too much that needs to be taken care of in the Tang sect, and I'm worried that the Abyssal Passageway could resurface at any time. So many powerful Abyssal beings have already arrived, and I don't think they'll give up so easily. It would take a few years for the full Blood God array to be completed, and most importantly, we still can't be 100% sure whether the Abyssal Passageway will appear in the distance or not. Tell us about the Blood God array. Will it be able to seal the passageway like the one in the Blood God Legion? Tang Wulin asked. Cao Dada shook his head in response. Most likely not. In fact, I dare say it's virtually impossible. 6,000 years ago, far fewer abyssal beings had invaded our plane, and they were also less powerful. Hence, after we forced them back, we actually seized control of the abyssal passageway. At the time, many of the most powerful soul masters of that generation locked onto the abyssal passageway, and the blood god array was essentially set up right on top of the passageway, thereby completely sealing it shut. However, this time, the abyssal passageway has managed to retreat, and only the connecting coordinates were left behind. As such, the blood god array can only be set up on our plane, rather than directly on the abyssal passageway. As a result, we can't predict when the abyssal creatures will return, and we also can't use the array's defensive power as the blood god legion can. Of course, if the abyssal passageway resurfaces at the same location, then the array will still have some effect, but it's difficult to say how effective it's going to be. Tang Wulin nodded in response. In that case, if the abyssal passageway returns, we'll be facing another stern battle, and we may not be able to count on the blood god array. Is that right? Cao Dadu replied. That's right. However, this is still far better than the prior situation. In my experience, there's virtually no way to alter connecting coordinates, so the abyssal passageway will definitely reappear at the same location, and it'll only be able to change locations after it connects with our plane. I don't know how the Holy Spirit cult managed to open this new set of coordinates for them here, but I presume it had something to do with the Blood River Godslayer array. Now that the array has been destroyed, it would be virtually impossible to change the coordinates unless the Holy Spirit cult can set up the array again. Tang Wulin said. I see. In that case, all of our Tang sex forces can remain here to contribute to the defensive effort. Does anyone have any suggestions for the Academy's personnel? He turned toward Long Yeyu as he spoke. Long Yeyu said, I suggest we also keep some people here for now as a precautionary measure. However, with the connection between the Tree of Life and the secondary Tree of Life, we can teleport people here at the cost of some life energy. Hence, I suggest that everyone aside from the limit Douluos go back. The education of the current cohort can't be delayed, and we have to prepare for the next round of enrollment. There will most likely be a lot of applicants this time. Also, I like Sichin's suggestion to set up a new branch of the Academy. We don't necessarily have to only enroll children with aptitude in soul technology. We should open our arms to all children with special talents. The motto of our Academy is that we only accept monsters, not normal people, but it doesn't say that we only accept soul masters. Tang Wulin nodded in response. I agree. Soul technology is advancing rapidly, and we can just stubbornly cling on to what we know best. The power of eternal heaven had left a lasting impression on everyone, and with the bold theory proposed by Ling there was a very good chance that soul technology development was going to enter a new era, one that would prepare humanity for space exploration. If Shrek Academy and the Tang sect didn't want to be left behind, then they would have to prepare in advance to be able to ride this wave. Thankfully, this direction had been identified by the head researcher of the Tang sect, so they were already leading the way. Chapter 1817, calling Yuena. Tang Wulin turned to the others and said, all right, then the ones from the Academy who will stay are Elderlong, the Holy Spirit Douluo, the Titan Douluo, the Free Sky Douluo, and the Healing Douluo, as well as all of Shrek's 7 monsters. Everyone else will go back, and if required, I'll get the Tree of Life to teleport all of you back here. Thus, everything was decided very easily. Many of the Tang sect's powerful beings were also going to stay behind, and virtually all of the most powerful beings from both organizations would remain at the northern front. Shrek's 7 monsters had no teaching duties at the Academy. Their mission was to focus on cultivation and improve themselves as much as possible. Shrek's 7 monsters had always been guardians of the Academy, and for them, self-improvement was more important than anything else. Through Tang Wulin's efforts, this generation of Shrek's 7 monsters had all become 4-word battle armor masters. Even though they hadn't directly clashed with the Abyssal army yet, they were undoubtedly going to be central figures in this battle. After everything was decided, the meeting was concluded, but instead of returning to his room to cultivate, Tang Wulin paid Ling a visit. Ling was currently lying on her bed in a state of utter boredom, reading a book about soul technology, the kind that was too advanced for Tang Wulin to understand. She put down her book upon seeing Tang Wulin's arrival, and a disgruntled look appeared on her face. When am I going to be able to leave? This place is so boring. There are no experimentation tools, so I can't test out many of my hypotheses. I've already sent everything that needs to be recorded back to the Tang sect, but I can't stand staying here any longer. Tang Wulin sighed. I'm afraid you still can't go back for now. According to Mother, it'll take at least 3 months of rest before your body can return to normal, so you can't leave during this time. Ling pouted in a display of dissatisfaction. But Shrek Academy's Tree of Life can also supply me with life energy. Why can't I go back to the Academy to rest? Tang Wulin explained. That may be true, but Mother has to control the flow of life energy into your body and monitor your bodily condition. She can't leave the northern front, so you'll have to stay here with her. Ling Zichen's face immediately fell upon hearing this. But I really need to go back. When inspiration strikes, experiments need to be conducted and recorded right away. Otherwise, once the inspiration passes, it may not come back again. Tang Wulin replied. I don't know anything about soul technology. All I know is that nothing is more important than your life. It's just only 3 months. Just endure it. Ling Zichen harumphed. Fine. In that case, you have to bring me some basic experimentation equipment. Otherwise, I'll go insane during these 3 months. Tang Wulin scoffed. Are you still not insane enough? How much more insane can you get? A cheeky smile appeared on Ling Zichen's face. Only in the presence of Tang Wulin or the 2 limit Douluos of the Tang sect would you put on an expression like this. I can be a lot more insane. You better not get on my nerves. Don't forget that I'm a human weapon. No, a human cannon. I can detonate eternal heaven on a whim. Perhaps I can even wipe out the entire human army. Tang Wulin's eyelids twitched slightly upon hearing this. It's not like you'll be able to use eternal heaven again anyway. By the way, can you extract eternal heaven out of your body and return to your original state? It's too dangerous constantly having such a powerful weapon inside your body. Ling Zichen replied. I can, but there's a roughly 30% to 40% chance of failure, in which case I'll explode. If you want me to give it a try, then I'll do it. Never mind. Tang Wulin hurriedly said. This was no joke. Not only was there a 30% to 40% chance of failure would spell doom for the entire human army. With that in mind, Tang Wulin heaved a resigned sigh with a shake of his head. In any case, focus on rest and recovery. I'm going now. Right at this moment, the sound of door knocking rang out. Come in, Tang Wulin prompted. The door was opened, and Shishi made his way into the room. Something's happened, boss. What is it? Tang Wulin's heart immediately tightened upon hearing this. Could it be that the Abyssal army had returned? Shishi replied. The Spirit Pagoda has just made an announcement that's shaken the entire Soulmaster world. What's the announcement? Tang Wulin asked. Shishi replied. The Spirit Pagoda announced that due to the current situation of the Soulmaster world, the Spirit Pagoda has an obligation to improve the overall power of all Soulmasters. As such, all Black Soul Spirits and entry tickets to the Myriad Beast plane will be at half price. Tang Wulin was quite relieved to hear this. At the very least, the Abyssal army hadn't returned. However, a hint of surprise then appeared on his face. Half price? One had to realize that Black Soul Spirits and the Myriad Beast plane were the Spirit Pagoda's 2 main sources of income. Black Soul Spirits were all extremely expensive, and many Soul Masters wouldn't be able to purchase one even if they were to sell everything they owned. A discount of 50% would significantly diminish the Spirit Pagoda's profits. The same applied to the Myriad Beast plane. It was already in extremely high demand. With this massive discount, demand would skyrocket even further. Could the Myriad Beast plane even hold that many people at once? With that in mind, Tang Wulin's gaze wandered toward the soul communicator on his wrist, and after a brief hesitation, he decided to give Yuena a call. These discounts undoubtedly no longer had anything to do with Kyangu Donfang. After all, the current leader of the Spirit Pagoda was Yuena, so why was she doing this? Was she trying to reform the Spirit Pagoda? If she could truly transform the Spirit Pagoda into an organization that prioritized serving the Soulmaster world above extreme profit, then that would undoubtedly be fantastic news. This was the first time that he had dialed her number ever since she had rejected him during the Joust for a Spouse event, and he couldn't help but recall the passionate kiss they had shared on the battlefield that day. Even now, the mere thought of it sent a surge of warmth flowing through his heart. Hey! Her familiar voice rang out from the other end, and Tang Wulin felt as if his heart were about to melt. Now that she was the Spirit Pagoda chairwoman, everything seemed to have suddenly become far simpler. Both of them were already leaders of the most powerful organizations on the continent, and even though they still couldn't be together, the walls between them seemed to have already vanished. I heard that you're running a discount on Black Soul Spirits and the Myriad Beast plane. Why is that? Tang Wulin asked. Yuena replied, it's for the sake of the development of the Soulmaster world. It was our mistake that caused the Western Legion to suffer heavy losses, and we can't expect the military to just let us off the hook unless we show some sincerity and repentance. I've only just officially become chairwoman, so I have to do something to repair the Spirit Pagoda's damaged reputation. By giving up some profit, we'll be able to gain more support. Tang Wulin asked, you didn't encounter any resistance from the Spirit Pagoda's board? They agreed for you to do this. Yuena replied, the choice is out of their hands. The Spirit Pagoda is currently rife with internal conflict, and the only way to stamp out the dissension is to be more assertive and aggressive. Besides, I was the one who created both of these things, and all those in the know understand that I'm doing this for the better future development of the Spirit Pagoda. The discounts are only temporary. At the very least, we have to weather this storm. For the Federation, it'll be easier to oppose foreign enemies if more Soulmasters could become more powerful. The invasion of the Abyssal Army has instilled a lot of fear into the federal government, and they'll be far less critical of the Spirit Pagoda in the wake of this gesture. At the very least, if you come to attack us again, the Federation will protect us this time. Tang Wulin's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this. Indeed, upon deeper thought, this was indeed a tactic that could kill multiple birds with one stone. Profits would inevitably suffer, but more support would be garnered. Chapter 1818. Bootlicker. If the Spirit Pagoda were determined to do everything in its power to serve the Soulmaster world, then even Shrek Academy wouldn't be able to attack them without encountering resistance. Furthermore, the Kyangi family had already stepped out of the limelight, and the situation in the Spirit Pagoda had stabilized. On top of that, the Spirit Pagoda actually isn't making much of a compromise in terms of profits. I've expanded the Myriad Beast plane, and all of the life energy absorbed by my Silver Dragon Spear was injected into the plane, making it more stable and also expanding it to close to twice its original area. As a result, it'll be able to hold more Soulmasters. So even though there's a half-price discount, if we operate at full capacity, there will still be a rise in overall revenue. Yuena revealed in a natural manner, as if Tang Wulin had the right to know all of the Spirit Pagoda's secrets. Tang Wulin was enlightened by this explanation. I see. That's good news for the Soulmaster world. What exactly are you planning to do with the Myriad Beast plane? Ming and Ming resided in that plane, and he had once asked Ming what exactly the Myriad Beast plane was, but Ming had given him a very ambiguous response. In particular, whenever Tang Wulin asked about why they were working with the Spirit Pagoda, a strange look would appear in Ming's eyes, one that was filled with a hint of apology intermingled with determination and resolution. Yuena was silent for a moment before replying. I'm sure you know about what the Great Star Dou Forest used to be like. The former Soul Beast world no longer exists, but I hope to transform the Myriad Beast plane into a new Great Star Dou Forest to give the remaining Soul Beasts a safe habitat. Her voice was filled with deep emotion as she spoke. Is this your vision? Is this why you've decided to stay at the Spirit Pagoda this entire time? Tang Wulin asked. That's right. Tang Wulin took a deep breath as if he were working up some courage, then said, Yue, I've always wanted to ask you this. Are you? Don't ask. I don't want to lie to you. When the time comes, you'll know. Yuena interjected in an urgent voice. When will that be? Tang Wulin asked. Yuena replied, perhaps it'll be very soon. When that time comes, I'll tell you everything. A faint smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face, and he said in a determined voice, I'll wait for that day. Yue, but just know that no matter who you are, where you came from, and what your future plans are, your future must have me in it. I can accept you no matter what you're like. Do you understand? Yuena offered no response to this, but even though the sole communicator, Tang Wulin felt as if he could sense her strong emotional fluctuations. After a long while, Yuena finally said, I have to go now. Bye. The call was ended, but Tang Wulin was still in a slight stupor. Her captivating voice was still echoing through his mind. Oi, you're about to draw onto the floor. A disgruntled voice shook him out of his stupor, and he turned to discover Ling Zichen looking at him with her hands on her hips and a cold smile on her face. Can you not be such a bootlicker? Can you not be so corny? Ling Zichen scoffed. Tang Wulin was rather taken aback to hear this. Bootlicker? Did I come across that way? Did you come across that way? You sure did. Ling Zichen replied in a cold voice. As soon as you began talking to her, you put on the most punch-worthy expression I've ever seen. I can't believe this is the leader of the Tang sect in Shrek Academy. You make me. You make me. Her voice trailed off here, but it was clear that she was about to erupt. Tang Wulin turned to Shishi with a befuddled expression. Is that true? Was I really like that? Shishi's lips twitched slightly upon hearing this. You really were, boss. A serious look appeared on Tang Wulin's face. You're not supposed to say yes to that. I think you need to improve your practical combat skills. How about I spar with you? I still have to inform the others about this. I'll be going now. Shishi immediately fled the scene, vanishing on the spot amid a flash of light. Tang Wulin turned to Ling Zichen to offer an explanation, only to be struck squarely in the face by a pillow. Shortly thereafter, he was pushed out Ling Zichen's room in a slightly bedraggled state, but he was in an exceptional mood. At the very least, he could frequently hear her voice, and the vendetta against the Spirit Pagoda had also been settled. As for the Kyangi family, they no longer posed any threat to him, and she didn't have to pretend to be on their side anymore. Everything suddenly seemed brighter and more positive. In Tang Wulin's eyes, the day that she revealed everything to him would be the day when they could be together. She wanted to create a Great Star Dou Forest, so he would just have to help her. As long as it was something she wanted to do, he would do everything in his power to help her. At the Spirit Pagoda encampment, Yuena ended the call and sat on her bed, struggling to control her own emotions. Tang Wulin's words were still echoing in the chambers of her heart, and her eyes were already brimming with tears. Wulin, I have no future. The tears began to overflow as she spoke. What happened, Nana? Right at this moment, a voice rang out, and Yuena raised her head to discover that Kyangi's Hanting had entered the room, but she had failed to notice him as she had been wrapped up in her own emotions. Nothing, Yuena said with a shake of her head. Nothing. Then why are you crying? Kyangi's Hanting hurriedly made his way over to her, yet just as he was about to sit down beside her, a burst of soul power surged forth to push him aside. Don't you know how to knock? Who let you in here? Yuena asked with a cold expression. Kyangi's Hanting faltered slightly upon hearing this. Why do I need to knock to see my fiancé? Get out. I don't want to see you right now, Yuena said in a cold voice. Kyangi's Hanting was finally beginning to realize that something was wrong. What's going on, Nana? Are you under too much pressure from taking over as chairwoman? Don't worry, our family will do everything we can to support you. Get out. I don't want to repeat myself, nor do I want to have to force you out, Yuena said. Kyangi's Hanting shuddered upon hearing this. Nana, you. His words abruptly cut off as Yuena looked into his eyes, and a pair of silver vortexes seemed to have appeared in her eyes. In the next instant, Kyangi's Hanting was completely rooted to the spot like a statue. Return to your room and meditate, Yuena instructed. Yes, Kyangi's Hanting replied in a wooden manner before departing. A hint of killing intent flashed through Yuena's eyes as she looked on at her departing figure. If it weren't for the fact that it still wasn't time to act, she would have already killed this bastard that had once tried to rape her. Ditian, come and see me, she said, seemingly to herself. However, after just a few seconds, a figure appeared before her amid a flash of golden light. It was none other than that handsome middle-aged man. He was the beast god that had ruled over all soul beasts for tens of thousands of years. My lord. Ditian extended a respectful bow toward Yuena. What's the situation in the Myriad Beast plane like? Yuena asked. A hint of irrepressible excitement appeared in Ditian's eyes, and he replied, everything is going extremely well, even better than we anticipated. The Myriad Beast plane has expanded to over twice its original area, and it's very stable. We've even begun moving some of the soul beast species that are on the verge of extinction into the plane to cultivate new genes there. It has to be said that we have the Spirit Pagoda to thank for the gene samples that are in their possession. With them, we've already managed to resurrect some extinct species. His eyes were full of emotion as he spoke. Chapter 1819, expanding the Myriad Beast plane. Yuena nodded with a pleased expression. That's great to hear. It's a pity that the Abyssal plane managed to get away. Otherwise, if I had managed to devour more Abyssal energy, the Myriad Beast plane would have become even stronger. If I could devour the entire Abyss, we may be able to establish a stable major plane that can act as the habitat for all soul beasts. Ditian smiled, and said, I'm sure that will happen someday, and everyone is very much looking forward forward to that day. The abyssal plane will definitely return. They won't be willing to give up so easily. The best case scenario would be for them and the human race to severely damage one another. That would be most beneficial to our plan. A hint of fear flashed through his eyes as he continued. My lord, is there a possibility that the weapon the humans used that day can be used again? The blast from eternal heaven had been truly devastating. Even the Blood River Godslayer array had been instantly smashed open like a watermelon, and the mere recollection of that was striking fear into his heart. Regardless of how powerful an individual was, they wouldn't be able to oppose that level of power unless they attained godhood. Yuena replied, this is why I always say to never look down on the humans. Do you understand why I devised the plan to integrate myself into the human world now? Only by gaining a sufficient understanding of them can we better target. What we do now is wait for the abyssal plane to reappear. If I can devour that spirit sovereign from last time, the myriad beast plane will at least be able to recover to the Great Star Dou Forest's former area. DTN asked, are you referring to that man with the divine origin realm spiritual power? If you hadn't urged me not to intervene, there's a decent chance we would have been able to trap him if we had joined forces. Yuena shook her head in response. Now's not the right time. We can't expose our power too early. As long as they come back, we'll always have another chance. It's a pity that the restriction of this realm is too powerful, thereby preventing me from recovering to the godly level. Otherwise, I really want to go to the abyssal plane to meet that holy lord. A hint of fanaticism appeared in DTN's eyes. My lord, if you fuse with the golden dragon king, the restriction of this realm will be completely inconsequential. Even in the divine realm, the power of the dragon god was unmatched. There's no way this lowly Douluo plane would be able to restrict you. Yuena shook her head in response. It's not that easy. The power of the golden dragon king is too domineering. It'll be very difficult to devour. But you've already obtained the former core of the dragon god. Shouldn't that be enough to facilitate a smooth fusion? DTN countered. Yuena's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this. That's not for you to worry about. Go back to the myriad beast plane and take care of the expansion. Keep doing the right things, and once the abyssal plane is devoured by us, it'll be about time for us to strike. On an official basis, DTN was the manager of the myriad beast plane. Yes. DTN replied before a determined look suddenly appeared on his face, and he said, my lord, I've been wanting to talk to you about that Tang Wulin. I really think you shouldn't hesitate on this matter any longer. His rate of development is far too fast, and he has that golden dragon spear formed by the rib of the dragon god. If you don't take care of him soon, he could ascend to godhood one day, and that'll spell a lot of trouble for us. Could it be that you've developed human emotions for him? Yuena's pupils instantly turned vertical, and a devastating aura fell upon the beast god, causing him to fall to one knee as his expression changed drastically. Do I need you to tell me what to do? Focus on the task you've been assigned. Yes. DTN could only repress the displeasure in his heart and heave an internal sigh before hurriedly departing. He was really regretting not acting sooner to kill Tang Wulin in the earlier stages of his development. It wasn't that he hadn't tried to do so, it was just that Yuena was too alert and always appeared just in the nick of time to save him. Could it be that she really had fallen in love with that human and developed human emotions? But everything was progressing according to plan, and she hadn't stopped striving toward their original goal. At this rate, they would have to clash eventually. What would she do then? DTN's heart was full of concern. It was virtually impossible for him to kill Tang Wulin at this point, setting aside the fact that he was constantly surrounded by a throng of limit Douluos. Even Tang Wulin himself was very close to him in power. A burst of golden light that was filled with a holy aura erupted forth, and the dazzling golden trident appeared in Tang Wulin's grasp. As it did so, he was able to sense the aura of the Arctic Ocean. This sea god's trident was the most precious thing his father had left to him, and now that the northern front had been stabilized, Tang Wulin decided to enter the world of the trident to undergo the next trials and truly gain control over this transcendent divine weapon. After careful consideration, he decided to do this beside the secondary tree of life. That way, he would immediately return to this place at the conclusion of the trials. According to past experience, regardless of how much time passed during the trials, the time that passed in the real world during the duration of the trial would never be more than a day. In fact, it was often the case that only an instant had passed in the real world. He had already primed himself into top condition, and it was time to begin. The golden trident symbol on his forehead was particularly bright, and his entire body was giving off a gentle aura. He took a glance at the secondary tree of life, then raised his golden trident high above his head, injecting his consciousness into it to immerse himself in its aura. I want to undergo the 9 trials of the sea god. In the next instant, Tang Wulin shuddered, and he arrived in a completely golden world amid a flash of light. However, the golden world only existed for a very short time before everything in the surrounding area became clear. Tang Wulin discovered that he was situated on a small deserted island, and the sea extended as far as the eyes could see in all directions around him. There was a gradient to the ocean's color from the deep blue in the distance to the light blue closest to the island. 4th trial of the sea god, break through the ring-shaped seal. Set off from your current position and depart from the island to travel to the land mass across the sea. During this process, you are prohibited from using any soul rings and soul skills, as well as flying and killing sea soul beasts. Begin. An authoritative voice rang out beside Tang Wulin's ears, and he couldn't help but feel like this voice belonged to his father. However, there was no chance for him to discern the voice as in the next instant. The entire surrounding area had already begun to transform. Massive waves suddenly rose up all around him, crashing directly toward his position. And within those waves, Tang Wulin could see a series of gigantic crabs with bodies that exceeded 3 meters in diameter, opening their pincers as they pounced toward him from the waves. Tang Wulin leapt up into the air, and in the instant that he did so, he immediately felt a sharp spike in gravity, almost instantly forcing him back toward the ground. One had to realize that Tang Wulin was currently a limit Douluo, so no ordinary pressure could prevent him from taking flight. However, this pressure was so powerful that he was completely powerless to resist it, which meant that it was very likely that he was facing power of the godly level. He was struck by the reflexive urge to release his golden dragon spear, but he immediately recalled that he was prohibited from killing sea soul beasts. These conditions really were rigorous. However, he was a seasoned veteran in battle at this point, and he didn't panic in the slightest. In the instant that he sprang up into the air, he immediately rotated on the spot, and his objective was very simple. He had to find the destination that he was supposed to head toward first. Chapter 1820, breaking through the ring-shaped seal. He was able to instantly catch sight of his destination as it was very clear. There was a landmass roughly 3,000 kilometers away in the same direction that he had originally been facing. The landmass was in the form of an arc, and the seawater around him had formed a ring. This was most likely the so-called ring-shaped seal. Now that all of that had been established, it was time to consider how to tackle this trial. Aside from the 3rd trial where he had witnessed the battle between Tang San and his 3 opponents, the memories of the other 2 trials were deeply ingrained in his mind, and they were definitely not positive memories. A faint smile appeared on Tang Wulin's face, and in the next instant, he was completely inundated by the seawater. As soon as the seawater engulfed him, he immediately sensed that something was different. In the outside world, his affinity with the sea was already very high. As soon as he entered the sea, he would feel as if he had returned home, as if the entire ocean were protecting him. However, right now, the sea around him was filled with enmity toward him. In the face of the violent waves, a normal soul masters would have most likely already been sent flying. Enormous water pressure surged toward him, and the giant crabs were also rapidly approaching. The crabs didn't seem to be affected at all by the seawater, and they advanced while scurrying sideways, bringing their massive pincers crashing down toward Tang Wulin's head. In the blink of an eye, Tang Wulin had already devised a strategy to pass this trial. He abruptly sank downward as he unleashed his mountain dragon king torso bone's gravitational control ability, and that allowed him to descend rapidly through the water like a metal statue. At the same time, he crossed his arms above his own head to ward off the oncoming attacks. A dull thump rang out as Tang Wulin accelerated in his descent, while the pincers of the giant crabs were repelled upward. Having already attained an invincible Vajra body, it was not an easy task to harm Tang Wulin. In the next instant, he had already landed on the seabed, upon which his feet immediately sank into the mud down below. However, that wasn't an issue for him. By accurately manipulating gravity with his mountain dragon king torso bone, he was able to stand on the seabed with ease. At the very least, he wouldn't have to worry about enemies attacking him from down below now. Soul power and dragon's repulse erupted out of his body. He couldn't use any soul skills, but that didn't apply to his dragon's repulse. Furthermore, he discovered that only his soul skills had been sealed away, but he was able to use all of his golden dragon king abilities. He stomped his right foot down onto the seawater, and a resounding boom immediately rang out. Under his precise control, all of the seawater around him was instantly forced outward in all directions, forming a vacuum around his body. All of the oncoming sea soul beasts were instantly kept out, while his dragon's repulse formed a protective barrier around him that encompassed an area area with a radius of 5 meters. Even without the vast sea cosmic seal to protect him, Tang Wulin was able to stroll toward his target as if he were taking a leisurely walk in his own backyard. Soon, the area around the barrier was filled with countless sea soul beasts, some of which were quite powerful, and they attacked the barrier through all types of methods. However, Tang Wulin's dragon's repulse was far more powerful than it had been in the past, and they weren't able to break the barrier no matter how hard they tried. Occasionally, a soul beast close to the 100,000-year level would emerge, but Tang Wulin would only have to expend some spiritual power to disrupt it and let his dragon's repulse take care of the rest. Even though he couldn't fly, a distance of 3 kilometers was still next to nothing for him. By the time he broke through the ring-shaped seal and arrived at his destination, only a few minutes had passed. He emerged from the water, and his dragon's repulse repelled the few sea soul beasts that had chased him onto land. As he set foot on solid ground and the light of the sun shone down upon him again, the same voice as before rang out once again. The 4th trial of the sea god, break through the ring-shaped seal, has been completed. Would you like to continue? Power really did make a massive difference. Tang Wulin heaved an internal sigh. Back when he had undergone the first trial, it had been an extremely tortuous process, yet now, he was able to complete the 4th trial so quickly and easily. Continue. Tang Wulin declared without any hesitation. With his 2 soul cores and dragon core pumping in unison, it only took him the span of a few breaths to recover the energy he had just expended, so he was naturally going to continue. 5th trial of the sea god, tidal body refinement, withstand the relentless tide for 49 days straight. Before Tang Wulin even had a chance to react, the scenery around him changed drastically, and his body was also tightly bound by something. To his surprise, he had been tied up, and what really alarmed him was that even with his powers, he was completely unable to struggle free from his restraints. His body was tied to a stone pillar, which was surrounded by the sea in all directions. This was a truly vulnerable position, and he had to stay like this for 49 days. Tang Wulin really wanted to ask whether Tang San truly was his birth father. What kind of father would set a trial like this for his son? Right at this moment, a giant wave surged forth and slammed viciously into his body. This wasn't a normal wave. It seemed to be imbued with incredible power. As it struck Tang Wulin's body, he was struck by the feeling that he was being crushed, as if a soul train were passing over his body. Was this really seawater? It felt more like a full-force soul power blast from a tidal Douluo. Before he even had a chance to finish his thought, another wave slammed into his body. Each successive wave was more powerful than the previous one, and they were crashing into him relentlessly. Tang Wulin was unable to do anything. As soon as he was bound to this stone pillar, he discovered that he was unable to draw upon any soul power, which meant that he was powerless to resist. However, just like in the previous trial, even though his soul power was inaccessible, no restriction had been placed on his golden dragon king abilities. As such, there was naturally no way that these waves could harm him. Tang Wulin couldn't even be bothered to unleash his golden dragon body and merely allowed the waves to wash over his body. With the power of his invincible Vajra body, all he felt was some pressure, but there was no substantial threat being posed to him. What was actually a more pressing concern was the boredom. Having to endure this for 49 days was simply too long. He began to meditate, thinking about the deeper understanding of the laws of heaven and earth he had attained in the instant that he had made his limit Douluo breakthrough, as well as thinking about whether it would be possible for him to create even more powerful dragon emperor restriction techniques in the future. Even though it was very difficult to meditate under these circumstances, this type of deep thought was still very helpful to him. Upon reaching a certain level in their cultivation, a soul had to slowly accumulate through deep thought, and that was the best way to reach a higher level. Thus, in this boring environment, Tang Wulin took the time to engage in this type of deep thought, using this as an opportunity to think about his own abilities. Even though he had already attained limit Douluo level combat prowess in the past, actually progressing to the limit Douluo level was still something completely different. Only at this level did he truly feel a hint of connection with that higher plane of existence. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.